Thank you for joining us for our Acid-Base Balance 101 webinar with Maureen Fontaine. Maureen's going to be talking about optimizing results using pH therapy. Maureen Fontaine, she brings an incredibly diverse background of experience and knowledge to the table, from dark field microscopy and live blood analysis to master herbalism, instructor at the Pacific Rim College, and then also diverse lecturing, writing, and instructing and sharing her knowledge base with everyone. Maureen uses biological medicine as one of the aspects of her practice, and biological medicine considers that the internal balance is essential to optimal health. An integral part of this internal balance and how it contributes is pH, or acid-base balance. And earlier when I was speaking with Maureen, she mentioned that she's really passionate about pH, and this is what her practice is based upon. So with that in mind, she becomes then very ideal for being able to share and talk about optimizing results using pH therapy in clinical practice. So with that said, I'd like to pass it over to Maureen, and we will get started on our presentation tonight.
So yes, indeed, pH is the mainstay of my practice, and I will explain why as we go through here. And I've been studying pH over numbers of years, so again, it keeps proving itself, and it's foundational. Disease is nothing more than the expression of an overly stressed acid-base regulation. In contrast, acute diseases are an attempt of the body to mobilize the available mineral reserves. And we see all kinds of presentation once the acid is being pushed out of the body and alkaline nutrition and medicine comes forward. Specifically, what I'm going to talk about today is, number one, that pH matters. It's such an important part, so we're going to get into that. The second part is terrain management. This takes a little bit of skill and perseverance, and yet is so simple that anybody can do it. And part three is I'm going to share with you how to help your patient attain balance and what all those numbers mean. So part one, pH matters. This experience of examining pH deepens the patient's relationship with their body. It's very, very wonderful to see them engage in what's happening and start making, noticing different things, etc. Doing pH therapy also supports a healthy microbiome. That's really the talk of the last few years, that, the importance of that microbiome, and this is absolutely on point with that. The other beautiful thing about pH therapy is that improvements are measurable. This really engages my patient. They're fully in, just right into it, watching it every day, and it helps them to see improvements, which is very, very encouraging, especially when they're not, feeling terrifically better yet. I call pH therapy the game changer. So the more aligned the pH is, the healthier you are. But the opposite also holds true. So in working with people, when they aren't feeling so well and we dip into checking the pH, they're going, oh my gosh, no kidding, because it's out of the range that's acceptable. And it's been totally the powerhouse of my patients' success and behind their success. So it's an overlooked component of any program, yet it is indeed the most powerful. So if you don't understand it yet, you're going to notice a huge change when you start engaging your patients with this. It's super hands-on. It's complex, yet very simple when we deal with patients, and it really matters. It truly, truly makes a difference. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty of pH. So pH stands for the potential of hydrogen. The body is dedicated to balance. When you take pH, it's the reporting system for how it's going in there. It officially measures the concentration of hydrogen ions in solution. So the objective of alkalizing is to flush the excess hydrogen ions out of the tissue. It's so powerful that it controls the speed of biochemical reactions enzyme production, and electrical flow. All body fluids contain hydrogen ions, and they either lose or gain ions. If atoms lose one or more electrons, they become positively charged or cations, which means they're acidic. If they gain one or more electrons, now they're negatively charged ions or anions, which means you're alkaline. So the quality and type of hydrogen ions in a solution determines if you're acid or alkaline. So in this part 2, I'm going to talk about terrain management. And there are 3 people that I look to when it comes to specifics on pH therapy. So there's Dr. Mortar, and we'll get into each of these people specifically. This is sort of a generalized consensus amongst them. And then Dr. Carrie Reams, and then Dr. Eddie Betterman. So urine and saliva report for how it's going in the blood. And because I work with blood, this is a pretty important thing. If you don't work with blood, this is still a really important thing. They have to be considered both separately and in relationship to each other. So I look at the pH of urine and saliva like a good relationship. Either you're talking, things are going harmoniously, or there's disruption or there's disagreement. Room for argument is another way to put it. The equation of health is when we take urine plus saliva, we multiply that by 2, and then we divide it by 3. And this is usually for the practitioner to understand, because this will tell us what the average pH is, which means in which direction it's leaning. Someone can look to have some pretty reasonable pH numbers, but when we run it through this little equation, we see it's actually having a tendency to one or the other. Dr. Enderlein, he speaks of pH therapy as being what heals all chronic illnesses. And the healing of all chronic illness happens when the body is slightly alkaline, or excuse me, the blood is slightly alkaline at 7.365. Urine and saliva are actually the reporters for how it's going in the blood. When they are both at 6.4, then the blood is at 7.365. Yes, 6.4 is slightly acid, and I'm going to show you how testing it in the first thing in the morning is going to say, yeah, everybody showed up for work last night and acid excess was released into the system. Dr. Otto Warburg found that oxygen deficiency initiates and accelerates cancer. The more balance, the more oxygen. And this is true in all of our work, I'm sure. Minerals control the amount of electricity in our body and the speed at which we gain access. And they're also the coenzymes that support vitamin function. So far, this is sounding like a pretty important consideration. Let's talk a little bit about acid pH. So many years ago, many years ago, I used to be a school teacher. Back in the day when we could test our saliva with little litmus strips and test urine as part of a science project. And one little guy called when he was in the acid zone, he called it his teary-feary zone. And this is really true. It was true for him because he was quite a teary little guy. And it's also true for patients when they come in. They're very hot and they have fast digestion. They are quick to anger. They're super emotional. There's going to be more burnout and exhaustion. In this, there's an increased potential for bacteria, fungus, viruses, etc. Way more inflammation. We see more allergies and reactive reactions to foods and environment. We see more toxicity and chronic degeneration. If you consider putting acid on your tabletop, it is eventually going to make a mark or even eat right through. So it's very important to move acid out. Where does acid come from? Well, when we're stressed, man, that becomes super important in this day and age when we're going through some global things, or in relationship or with your job or whatever it is. Overwhelm, stress and overwhelm really peaked right now for most people, and overstimulation. Shallow breathing is more common. You'll find the person is breathing from only the upper part, and there's less oxygen in body. Things like coffee, processed foods, excess animal protein will contribute to that acidic profile. Environmental factors also influence this greatly. Here we have a great quote. Acidic milieu provides the highly structured microorganisms in our body with ideal conditions for intensive development towards their harmful fungal forms. So we see that acid, with an acidic situation, there's a deficient blood supply to tissue. There's an inefficient disposal of metabolic waste, and we're a hotbed for pathological issues, meaning microbial life. And I certainly do see that this happens. So the more acid you are, the more microbial life is overtaking your body. And this also increases our susceptibility to exogenous microbes or parasites. So here, this is an acidic milieu. This body is leaning heavily into an acid situation. This patient's pH was 5.5 and 5.8, very acidic on both urine and saliva scale. And it's the blood is growing chondrites, which are part of the pleomorphic cycle, and they're part of the deposition phase. So this body is going to collect things. It's going to have all kinds of deposits and debris in the milieu. This is certainly, in some cases, and although I don't diagnose, this is considered to be a precancerous situation. This can change, however. Here's an example of that pleomorphic activity. If this was a video, it would be fascinating. But you can see all kinds of creepy crawlers in the background. We can see things morphing into pathology, and it's just not happy in there at all. You can notice that inside the red blood cells, which are the circles with kind of a reflection inside, you can see that they're starting to grow microorganisms or pleomorphic forms within the cells themselves. And the immune system becomes very, very stressed. In this picture here, we see a plethora of lymphocytes. And this is never a good situation. So this again is leaning towards more of a cancerous situation. So let's talk about the other side of things. Alkaline pH. This is a more slow, cool, and balanced body. There's more independence within the red blood cells, and they're super strong and doing just what they should be doing. And we have a very healthy working microbiome. There's low upregulation of all those forms that we just saw, the pleomorphic, the bacterial, the fungus, and viruses. And to be considered here, however, is that it too has a tipping point with upward mobility. So, and two examples of this are, there was one patient who was doing like super alkalizing herself until it was too far, and then she couldn't turn it around, and she passed away shortly thereafter. This was on her own doing, that she was doing this experiment. Her body started to harden, and she developed what they called at the time an aggressive melanoma or a galloping melanoma. And so that was too much. I don't know it as a fact, but it appeared that her pH up at 8.5 and 8.8, etc., it got locked in, and that's not something that sounds like a good idea. Another time there was a group, and they were doing high doses of wheatgrass, and they were so alkaline, it was just over the top again, and their kidneys started to suffer considerably. So always be really careful, and this is where I really appreciate the pH regulation. If we look at balance, Buckminster Fuller, he was quite a character if you know anything about him, and he always talked about watch a log burn in the fire, and this is actually the sun's radiation unwinding, and it's the circle of life. So the sun, it creates this beautiful food, and then we get to eat it, and the plants actually extract the flame of the sun and consume it. The plant draws up the cationic earth, which is the positive ions, and it reaches towards the anionic sky, which are the negative molecules. So this balance, having a balance, makes it possible to reap the benefits from your foods as for humans, but also for soil. All these principles are also applicable to soil. So if I have a farmer coming in here, he's just on the farm, and he has grade 2 education, we can talk for hours about pH balance because it's the same principle. So interesting. And this is balanced blood. Quite a difference from what I showed you earlier. You can see there's a lot of spaciousness and buoyancy. The background is very unencumbered, and the little neutrophil down at about 8 o'clock there is an immune system that's doing exactly what we want it to do. Let's dip into Dr. Mortar. He's a chiropractor, and he's written a wonderful little book on pH therapy and pH balancing. And he says that when the pH is balanced, it shows us that we have nutritional stability. He calls it a health check update, not a diagnostic tool. And I would absolutely agree with that. One thing I found quite interesting, because this used to be a real thing, it's like, well, my stomach is this pH and this food is that pH, and it's like doing intricate calculations to figure out what's going on. But he says that these dedicated pH values for food are consequential, yet the milieu, the inner terrain, is of far more significance. Best organic food or supplements need that balance within the body in order to pull nutrition out. Protein waste in the blood cannot be pumped out when there's an imbalance. It's just like, consider that the alkaline position is like having super strong biceps. You can handle what comes in and take care of business. When protein waste gets to circulate in the blood, these are referred to as allergens or sensitivities, and they show up for so many. Also, when you're using test strips, and I give kudos to the strips provided by Biomed, they're the better ones that I've ever used, and they're very, very nice indicators. And if you are indeed going to do an extensive study of pH, you do need a meter. So again, Dr. Mortar says when the urine is super alkaline, it says that our digestive enzymes are getting weak, and it also tells us the status of the secretions of the liver, pancreas, and colon. If we have too much acid in the saliva, we know liver function is low. We have weak bile and low alkaline enzymes, and certainly low energy. We have more of a tendency to stomach ulceration, colitis, loose stools, etc. Now, moving along to Dr. Carey Reams. If any of you are familiar with Dr. Carey Reams' biological theory of ionization, he was someone I studied for years, and he's again part of my passion for this, for examining people and testing in this way. He says that we are biological vehicles that operate via an electrical system, which was mentioned before. The ideal range for both urine and saliva is actually that 6.4 first thing in the morning for your basic testing. Balance, when we're in balance, it liberates any of that accumulated acid and debris, and symptoms arise again with the distance between the urine and the saliva, so that room for disruption, that room for argument. We need both sides of the story. pH examination gives us that insight, and it actually, for me as a practitioner, I know what to do next in order to rectify a situation. Let's say something's revealed itself through that, things are going along well, but it gives me an idea of what to do next. And also sometimes the patient isn't getting the results they want, so really dipping into this examination of pH is very central. So let's look at symptomatic patterns. Again, there's that equation that I gave you before. So urine pH plus saliva pH times 2 divided by 3 equals your average pH, or the leaning, the tendency. So urine is the fast responder and saliva is the slow responder. So let's talk about urine pH. It's going to measure your overall body fluids and tell us about stomach enzymatic ability, kidney and adrenal gland function, and urine is most affected by what goes into your mouth, and it indicates your alkaline reserves and the outcome of digestion, and more specifically, liver function. I call urine pH, I call her a little bit of the dancing circus pony because it goes up and down and up and down a lot. Saliva, however, is slower moving and it's more stable. This measures your enzyme functioning levels of the pancreas and the liver. As you can see, there's a little bit of overlap. This is the result of alkalizing or acidifying the effective food, so again, mineral reserves. It mirrors our overall digestive and emotional stress, and significant saliva imbalance affects the lungs. This can be tied into our use of mucor and the presence of mucor and aspergillus. And wonderful that we now have aspergillus niger as a remedy. Very excited that day. Dr. Eddie Betterman, he's a medical doctor, a medical microscopist, and is a practitioner of biological medicine. And I studied dark field with him. He was one of the people I studied with. And he talks about how pH impacts every biochemical process in the body, and it tells us how much oxygen there is. So we have our 4 foundational minerals: calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. So this is kind of interesting here. So with sodium and magnesium, if we have a wide pH assimilation range, it's still really easy to drink that in. Calcium and potassium, their range to accept nutrition, etc., is a bit narrower, so it's a bit more finicky. So that pH needs to be a little bit more balanced so you get full use of those minerals. Manganese and iron, it gets narrower, and with zinc and copper, even narrower. Iodine, which is so quintessential to the function of the thyroid, requires nearly perfect pH. So I wanted to talk about something called competitive inhibition. So we've talked about how minerals control electricity and the speed of access to nutrients, and that minerals are the coenzymes that support vitamin function and behavior. So competitive inhibition is, I find, truly fascinating. And this is a really big study at the college in one of my classes. We see that as even slight fluctuations of minerals occur, it can significantly influence health. We know that lead displaces calcium, cadmium displaces zinc, zinc displaces copper, yet we see that excess copper can result in diabetes. Yet the proper ratio of copper to zinc is great as an antioxidant. There's a beautiful book that I've just highlighted at the bottom here, Nutritional Balancing and Hair Mineral Analysis by Dr. Lawrence Wilson. I used to do hair and tissue analysis, and that again is a very fascinating thing. And this book on itself will tell you all about those ratios that I just gave you a little taste of here. Mineral depletion looks like this in dry blood. It's very beautiful, yet very telling. This also happens when a patient drinks too much water, and we know if a patient drinks too much water, especially in the case of an athlete, that they're minerally depleted, so we need to reinstate the system with electrolytes, etc. This remedies really quickly, good news, with the pH balance. This is what chemicals look like in a dry blood sample. Those black rings and the dark rings that you see going further into the sample and even at the edges, that's chemical, and your body is attempting to push that out. Good solid pH balance helps push that out of the body. And we want to get it out because that will displace minerals. So let's take a little look at the emotional components here. Whether you're acid or alkaline, it's very much affects the emotional being. If somebody's really, if we go back, if somebody's really acidic, more teary, more nervous, fearful, etc. So buffering minerals also hold the delicate balance of the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system. So acidosis is yin and alkalosis is yang. And you can see there with each of those minerals, each of them will stimulate one or the other. So If we consider the yin and the yang, it's a counterbalancing dance, just as in our biology with pH. And always, even in the yin and the yang, we're looking to transform what is out of balance into balance. If we become too acidic, applying alkalizing therapy is just so very helpful. And this is a dance of, kind of dynamic equilibrium. And this again will help balance the emotions of your patient. Often they will come in and be extremely emotional sometimes. And, if somebody comes in and they're just a bundle of tears, I will actually give them a shot of the basic powder or the Pleo Alcala or the tabs, basic tabs, and they feel better, they calm down. Rubimed is also extremely beneficial in these situations. Let's get into part 3, which is the meat of the presentation, which is how do you do all this? How do you attain balance? So the art of alkalizing, this is not unfamiliar to any of you, I'm sure. But if the alkaline reaction in the duodenum is insufficient, we have the digestion of fats, carbs, and proteins remaining incomplete. And then we get fermentation that sets in. In addition, if acids, including phosphoric acid, sulfuric acid, and uric acid, are not neutralized, remember, acids can really damage, they will further accumulate in the connective tissue, and we can see the development of disease conditions, etc. Conscious eating. Again, in each of our practices, we're very, paying a lot of attention and very diligent and mindful of good eating. Everybody has their way, and everybody has what works for them and their patient base. We all can agree that food is your medicine, and let medicine be your food. Having a plan is essential. So I call all of this work an exercise in noticing. So really pay attention to your inner dialogue. And I talk to patients a lot about that. Some people are so stuck that they're afraid to get well. These are conversations that are valuable. And by engaging them with understanding their pH and actually, whoa, look at my numbers, they're paying attention when it comes to foods as well and seeing how that's affecting. So the basics, organic foods as best you can, 70 to 80% steamed vegetables, hydrate well with purified water, and again, embrace the changes. This is where having conversations, noticing where they're settling or resisting or denying the help, or where they're just so stuck. This is part of what being a practitioner is about. So you notice and help them with that aspect as an adjunct to what you're doing. I encourage people to greatly lean into their tribe or their village, get support where they need to, such as massage or meditation or other practitioners like colon hydrotherapists and different people like that can help them find their way to health and happiness. And move the body, have a sleep routine, breathe, meditate, and supplement as necessary. So baseline pH testing. So I'm speaking specifically of Ream's biological theory of ionization here because it's the one most familiar to me. I've tried all of them, and this is the one I always fall back on. So this is how to track the patterns. So I have patients do 2 sets of 10 days. So the first 10 days, they're going to collect day 1, 2, and 3, test both urine and saliva first thing in the morning before food. This is the only time of day they do this testing. And this starts to establish a baseline because I want to see where are you before, and then because as soon as we apply an alkalizing agent, it changes very quickly. So we have this baseline, not using pH therapy products, and continue doing everything else they were doing before they saw me. Day 4, this is the introduction of the pH therapy products, and continue doing all of that until day 10, and that is when you stop recording, yet still continue with the pH therapy and any other products that I have recommended. Keep going. Now, the second 10 days is typically after 1 month. That's how I stagger things out with a new patient. And I have them collect 10 days of numbers before they come to see me. So just before they come to see me, they're going to mark back on their calendar 10 days and then bring those numbers, all those numbers with them. And this is where a good time to check in with you. I know that sounds a little confusing, yet it's quite straightforward, and it will be more understandable in the materials Heather will pass on to you. So let's take a look here. When someone is working with their pH and collecting numbers, I also ask them to notice how the readings relate to their symptoms. For example, oh my gosh, I noticed that when I'm really acidic, this goes on for me, or I was awake all night, or I woke up without a headache. Amazing stuff. The distance between the two numbers, have them see that that's actually when their belly was very disruptive. And I always really want to remind patients that numbers vacillate. Your body's very organic. It's going to change all the time. It's not like we need to get somewhere and it's going to nail itself in and stay there. That's not how it works. So they're going to go up and down and up and down. And while we're doing pH therapy, I want the numbers to get to the end of that litmus paper, 7.4, until we decide otherwise. This can go on for a month, 2 months, 3 months, depending. So again, that's another conversation, but that's kind of baseline. The movement of the numbers reflects the pumping mechanism of the cells. It tells us things are working. And over time, so if the pH of urine and saliva are quite staggered, you will see that it's operating within quite a big bandwidth. As they become healthier, it's actually nice and smooth within a narrower bandwidth. This is a form that I've asked Heather to share with you, where we agreed that it would be a wonderful addition. So this is what actually the form I give my patients. So we see, I tell them about the buffering minerals and explain about the urine and the saliva and what each of them is doing. And they do have a swing range within that kind of ideal range. And the movement of these numbers, this is again something I have to reiterate over and over, is that these numbers reflect both the strengths and the weaknesses of your body. And they are constantly changing. How your body responds to the treatment, like how quickly you rectify, is also an indication of the strength of your inner milieu. And that's exactly what we're here to do. When the numbers go up and down when we initially start, that's actually great, because it shows me the pumping mechanism is working and everybody showed up for work. It should be relatively dynamic initially. So it operates like a teeter-totter. For a couple of days, we might see urine very acidic and saliva quite alkaline, and then they'll switch positions. This is a very normal thing to happen. This pH wheel is a really fun one to work with. So you'll see just to the left of neutral, we see urine and saliva there. So we know that urine and saliva should be approximately 6.4. We know that cancer cells begin to form at 5.8. So this is when there's more pleomorphism and mutation of cells. And you can see different things that will, that have a certain pH value. And one that's not on there is coffee. And I was at a coffee shop one day and I said, what's the best coffee? What's the pH? And they said 4.2. So if I'm trying to get your pH into a zone, it makes absolute sense to me that coffee would not be the best thing for you to do. So with that explanation, patients take themselves off the coffee train quite easily, because that's always people want to negotiate about the coffee. And they do notice a difference in everything. This is the Salivary pH acid challenge, and this is what Biomed has so beautifully outlined for you. And this can be found on the website, as you can see at the link below. And this is where you lay out strips and you do this test over a period of time. And it's very meticulously outlined. And this can also give you an idea of what I like most about this is the response of the autonomic nervous system to stress. And acid is being used as the stressor. So this is super, super great. So stress can also be your food. It can also be your partner, or it can be anything that's going on in your life. There are lots of other testing methods too, and I want to respect all the different methods out there. My test is basically called the wake up test. And that one's pretty easy, and I've explained that. Then we have the daily cycle test, the salivating test, the acid meal test, and the alkaline meal test. These are kind of fun to work with. And I don't use them too often, but once in a while when I do, it's an absolutely great choice. And for some patients, we need to engage them on a little bit of a different level. So these are options for you. What an alkalizer can do in 3 months takes over 2 years to accomplish the same results eating a vegetarian diet alone. Wow, quite incredible. So an alkalizer is really, really wonderful. So the ideal times, if we're looking at milieu or pH therapy, the ideal time to take the pH neutralizing powder or tabs is 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. on an empty stomach, always on an empty stomach. These are the low energetic times for the pancreas in Chinese medicine. So this is, taking this provides energy. And this avoids interference with the hydrochloric acid. And we use warm water so that it bypasses the stomach through the pyloric sphincter and heads to the duodenum. And when I remember the first time I suggested that a patient do it at 10 and 4 and kind of held my breath to watch for their reaction. And they were really great with it. And she was one of my more challenging patients. She just knows so much. And she always questions, incredible questions. And she emailed me after her 10 days. She says, that was so easy because 10, I've already had my breakfast. It's between, it's so perfect. It's easier even than the other way. Let's look at the gift of these fabulous products that Biomed has. And I really mean that. There are very few companies that pay attention to this. So this is the difference maker. My favorite is the Pleo Alkala powder. And again, this, corrects those imbalances. In doing so, we get rid of inflammation and we regulate the milieu, and we get an increased mitochondrial respiration. And the dosing, again, I changed this, but the base is a 1/2 to 1 scoop mixed in warm water on an empty stomach. Depending on the patient, if they have trouble sleeping at night, I'm going to do that at bedtime. If they wake up in the morning with nausea, I'm going to do it in the morning. So I'm flexible with the application. Basic powder or tabs. Basic powder is also just wonderful. And I know that I believe Heather, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but if someone has a high blood pressure that's salt sensitive, the basic powder will actually be a better choice for you. And just as the Pleo Alkala, this also restores balance. And the tablets, so that's not very clear here, I see a little slip up in my presentation, but the powder is the same application as with the Pleo Alkala. And the tabs, 2 tabs is equivalent to a teaspoon. So they would take, if it's 1/2 teaspoon, you kind of want them to zero in on, you would do 1 tablet. Same things apply. Now, any of these, the Pleo Alkala, basic powder, and tabs, I often, for the person with acid reflux, I will have them do another dose when they're experiencing acid reflux. It works really, really well. For those of us of a certain age, we grew up with taking baking soda or effervescent products like Eno and different things like that. And they did a very similar thing, probably not as nicely as these. Pleo sanuvis. I use a lot of Pleo sanuvis in my practice as well, and Pleo citro. So we see that this is a homeopathic lactic acid. This, I love this part. It raises the cellular respiration of mitochondria by 350%. Like whoever knew, right? It helps with congestion of the lymph, the heart, and the circulation. And it really helps people with skin diseases, dental issues. If anyone has had a track record of cancer, even as a historical imprint, I want them on this. If they have tumors or there's suspicion of tumors, get on this. Again, headaches, influenza, infections, respiratory issues, any breathlessness upon exertion, and this works really well hand in hand with Pleo Muc. The Citroen, both Sanubis and Citroen, help with deacidification. We see again increased cellular respiration, improvement in bone density, regulating digestion, UTIs, the genitals, anything that goes on in those areas. Also the nervous system, it helps to calm, it helps to support the heart and circulation and the respiratory system, and again for dental issues. So many applications. And Pleoform, sorry, I just jumped there a little quickly, but let me just go back here. I've left off the dosing, and you can get that directly from Biomed, because it depends on which form you grab. Pleoform, this is an adjunct to pH therapy, and this is applicable in the cases of rheumatism, joint inflammation, allergies, eczema, and bronchial asthma. This is very important to provide comfort for the patient that is suffering a great deal with those aches and pains or extreme allergies or skin issues. So this again is a beautiful adjunct. So nature versus nurture. So Dr. Hemal Patel, he joined with Dr. Joe Dispenza community to study the effect of nature, so who we are, in relationship to the environment. So our environment, meaning also the internal environment, because he also refers to blood in the study. Organisms can change their genetic predisposition by modulating gene expression through behavior and environment. And there's a little potential for the hereditary implication there too. He speaks about how the blood environment can be changed by meditation alone. That being said, we can change our blood cells and the expression and behavior of the blood cells by giving attention to how we think. He did experiments, him and Dr. Joe did experiments focusing on the blood, with the blood on the screen, and they saw the blood began to organize itself in a healthy way. I've done this experiment myself many, many times, even before I knew about Dr. Patel, and it is so true, so true. Energy is energy. So this kind of cooperative investigation provided the opportunity to get a look at the peak biological signature, sometimes called the molecular fingerprint. It's very, very true. Looking at the blood alone is the soul speak. It's the imprint of the soul, our spiritual aspect. So this again all links in beautifully together. They proved through their studies, and I believe the study is ongoing, is that experience does in fact create the effect. And if you want more information on this, this is easily found through Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, excuse me. And he himself has a lot to say about the influence of vibrational frequency, of foods, of thought, of environment, as we heal. Meditation can be a huge, huge contribution to this. Always choose good nutrition, balance your pH, and meditate. Who you are as a person will respond very well to the nurturing. And in conclusion, I know I've said it before, but I just might say it again, that this is the foundation of my practice, and it has proven itself every time. Once you get patients to work with the pH therapy, it's not that we have to do it all the time and take tons of numbers. 10 days and 10 days. Another 10 days in another month's time. Another 10 days in another 10 months' time, depending. All of this will tell you truly what's happening in the inner milieu. And now you are in charge of how it goes. how it unwinds itself and presents itself to you is going to tell you exactly what to do next. And that is the beauty of pH. Thank you for listening and for your time.
That was a fabulous presentation, Maureen. Thank you so much. I'm sure everyone on here has learned at least something, and for many lots. And I have to say, even though I've been practicing this for 20 years as well with pH and acid-base balance, I also learned something, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
Now, for those of you that have questions, we invite you to either type them into the chat room or type them into the Q&A section, and we'll get them answered for you. Just while we're waiting for that to happen, there were 2 questions that came in through the presentation, and I was able to answer them. So rather than asking those questions specifically, Maureen, to you, I just wanted to share the answers for everybody so that they were aware of it. One of the naturopaths in Ontario asked about taking an alkalizer with herbal tea instead of hot water. And so the answer is yes, you could use herbal tea as long as it's a straight herbal tea with nothing in it. The idea with the hot water when you're using an alkalizer is you're on an empty stomach and you're using that hot water to help move things through the stomach and into the small intestine. And so you don't want it to be cool because it will take time for the stomach to warm it up to body temperature. And you don't want anything in there other than just liquid, water liquid, because you don't want to stimulate any hydrochloric acid production in the stomach. The idea is that you want the alkalizer to be sitting for as the least amount as possible time, and so it can move into the small intestine where then it can start to get absorbed and do the work that it needs to do. So, excuse me, with that, warm to hot water or plain herbal tea, both of those can be used. And again, with the herbal tea, you don't want to have any honey in it or any sweeteners or any milk. It's just a straight liquid, maybe with just the herbs to flavor it. Okay, so that was the one thing I just wanted to share with everybody. And then the other thing, excuse me, here. Oh, yes. There was just a comment regarding Pleo Alkala and how well does it dissolve in the hot water. In hot water, Pleo Alkala actually dissolves almost completely. And so you just need to give it a bit of time and to stir it up, and it will dissolve nicely. I always use hot water to mix it, and then I just wait a few minutes to let it cool down a little bit before I take it. The basic powder, because it also does have some calcium and magnesium in it, it doesn't dissolve quite as well, so you may find that there's a little bit of undissolved sediment on the bottom. So just for understanding about the basic powder and the Pleo Alkala and how it dissolves in the hot water as a note for everybody. Okay, so let me just see here. So questions, we've got a few that have just popped in here. So for the references regarding what Maureen is going to be sharing, we have the pH balancing and the charts that she had up for the pH, titled pH Symptomatic Patterns. And so it will cover that. And then also Maureen has shared her chart with the 3 days of doing the baseline and then the 10 days of the measurements and then the second chart to be able to do that. So those are forms that I'm going to attach into the follow-up email. And Maureen, if you could kindly go back to that slide that had your references. Yes, one of the practitioners, she wanted to just take a look at those. So Dr. Kneebone, what I will do in the follow-up email is make sure that you have the resources from Biomed. Also, in addition to the 2 resources from Maureen, there will be the Salivary pH acid challenge document on how to do that, the step-by-step. I'll include that as well. And then I'm going to include an entire set of the notes as a PDF, so this reference slide will also be within those notes as well. Okay, so here's some, okay, Maureen, now here's some real questions. um, what is the best way to take Pleo Citro and Pleo Sanavis?
I work with the tablets. I worked with the drops before, but I've used mostly tablets because people find it user friendly and they can take them with them if they need to more easily. Um, with the tablets, I have them just dissolve them in their mouth and do that 1 to 2 times a day. It really depends on the situation. But that's what I do. And the same 1 to 2 times a day for the drops. Again, depending what's going on, it might be once or twice a week only that they're using it. So it really depends. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think that's a good answer. It's the practical way. So we've got the drops and the tablets. The tablets definitely are the easiest to take because they dissolve under the tongue in just moments. With the drops, they can be added to water or they can be taken directly in the mouth. And depending on the situation, depending on the protocol, and depending on the case, sometimes you might be taking Pleo Citro and Pleo Sanavis multiple times a day. Sometimes you might be taking one or you might be taking the other, and sometimes it's just once a day, sometimes it's just a few times a week, again, depending. If you're looking at the kind of overall general recommendation, then it's usually 20 to 30 drops or 2 tablets of Pleo Citro or Sanavis. The dosing is pretty similar, once to twice a day. Okay, and then if Laura, if you have any specific questions or about a specific case and how to be using Pleo Citro and Pleo Sanavis, reach out and I'm more than happy to talk about that further with you. Okay, so now we have another question. And again, back to kind of the alkalizers. So how do you determine whether to put a client on the powder versus the tablet? And how long, so how many days and weeks should they utilize the product?
So my determining factor, my number one first choice is always going to be Pleo Alkala. Number one, it's extremely good value because it also includes the pH paper. And so they're set to go. There's no more to think about. And it dissolves so easily, as you said, Heather. I do, however, ask them how they feel about things that might taste a little bit salty, or it's not really chalky, but it's a little bit of a consistency. And if they're going to be fussy, definitely I give them the tabs. My preference always is going to be powder just because of how slick it is, how smooth it is in getting into the body. But again, I follow what is going to be done rather than my preferences. What is going to be the most user-friendly? Was there another part to that question?
I concur. Whatever is going to be most user-friendly is definitely, in many cases, the determining factor. And some people don't like to drink the powder mixed, and some people are on the go all the time, so having the tablets is just going to be a little bit easier for them. And so Alkala should, in many cases, be the first choice. Then the basic powder and the basic tabs would be kind of second choices. The second part of that question is how long to take them for.
Okay, so I just want to say one thing before I get to how long. I have patients who take both the powder, whether whichever one it is, and the tabs, because they can take the tabs when they're working all day. This is especially for the patient with acid reflux. Now, I'm very clear with them, they're not to use it like a Tums, like you would just keep popping these. And one fellow said that he just realized that he just needed to do it once and he was fine. And he only did it for a few days and it wasn't needed anymore. So it's really good feedback from patients. And with respect to how long to be using these, again, I make that decision based on the pH. I never want to keep anybody on anything forever. But for some people in really difficult cases, I'm going to have them up to, I think one lady, she's just finishing 6 months, but now it's starting to finally move into the right zone. Then I take them off and see how they do on their own without the support. And it's always there should they need to pop back in just to give a little top up.
All right, that's a good. I think that, as you mentioned, the length of time, a lot of the time it depends on testing and where the pH is at, and that's actually the beauty in all of this, is that you can test and see where patients are at, and once they get into those normal ranges, in healthy ranges, and everything's looking well balanced, then that's when you can stop. From the biological medicine perspective and kind of how the European teaching from Sanam and then also just from European biological medicine is in chronic degenerative type conditions or more serious type things, there's an expectation of about 3 months. It takes about 3 months to shift the acid out of the body. With the testing, you'll be able to determine if it actually takes that long or not. In my own personal practice, I found that an average of 2 to 3 months is usually kind of where it takes for most people to get back into balance. Okay, so then next we have a few more questions here. Oh yeah. Okay, so this is some specifics about the pH. If the morning urine pH is alkaline and the saliva is also alkaline and the blood looks acidic, is pH therapy still the best option?
Usually when that is the situation, I do a detox just to start things moving. Because remember, as things become too alkaline, we get more congestion. And so I need to flush things. But again, I have the benefit of the blood to show me whether that's an application I need to move forward with or not. But that's what I typically will do, is to start to coax acid out of cells. We know that acid can hide, so that's what I'm always suspicious of. So it's very rare that somebody's alkaline, both urine and saliva. So it is a rarity. I don't know, Heather, how would you deal with that?
So also, the one thing, so I don't do so much the saliva, the testing. More I'm looking at the urine. But what I do know, if your first morning urine is alkaline, then, and you're not taking an alkalizer and you're not on a highly, highly alkaline diet, then the next thing to think about is something called acid block. And that's where the kidney tissues are very congested and also are fairly acidic and blocked so that it's not actually allowing the acid to get released out of the urine. And so it will make the urine look like it's in a more alkaline range. And so in that case, detoxing, again, is the thing, kidney detoxing. Sometimes you move in with Pleo Citroen, Pleo Sanavis, and if it is indeed a kidney or an acid block with the kidney tissue, then what will happen in about 2 weeks is all of a sudden the urine then drops and becomes really, really acidic. And so then you know you've kind of broken through and you've got the body excreting again, which of course is kind of in this whole detox process. So ultimately, kidney detoxing, if the urine is looking really alkaline, is one of the things to definitely consider. And then, Corazon, I see that you had a similar question to that. So the answer that Maureen just provided and the things that I just added, those would also apply to what you're doing more from a detox perspective, not so much from an alkalizing perspective until things have shifted. Okay, so then, Maureen, we've got a few more questions in here. So Donata asks, in the first month of alkalizing, are you giving other supplements?
Great question. When I initially start with people with the pH therapy focus, I may overlap it with detoxing because it will support detoxing, it will liberate toxins, it will and know what to do with them. So for me, that's a nice coupling. I ask them to reduce any other supplements that they're using at least for the first 3 days of testing. Like if they're working with another practitioner, which often can happen in my work, they want to see the blood, but they're already working with a naturopath, for example. I want to respect that relationship. So I ask them that if they can just kind of, not do it for the 3 days of that baseline testing, and then use all their things and get started with pH therapy on the day 4 of the 10 days, then that seems to go very well. The other time when I will couple it with something is if somebody is in a very much discomfort with respect to their condition, and I will help with that as well. So I use a lot of gastro ease again to help with that gut pain. I get a lot of people with really severe gut pain, and so that's a great time to apply that. But less supplementation on top of that. Like keep it super minimal is my rule.
And then from the same practitioner, we have one further question. Is there any worry about kidney stone formation with long-term use of an alkalizer?
In my understanding, it is absolutely safe to use it in the ways that we've described here. Looking at the 3-month, like always at the 3-month, I'm going to take a break and just see how things settle out. But we can go back into pH therapy, like with the woman that was doing, it's kind of been 6 months of doing it. There were breaks in there. And she continues to need the support. She has a lot of conditions that are also being medically addressed. So there's just a lot. But my understanding is we don't need to worry about how this will affect the kidneys. I seem to remember that from my conversations with you, Heather, if you can speak to that.
So how my understanding with kidney stone formation is it tends to be something that's a little bit more along the line of functioning in an acidic body, not a properly balanced body. And so sometimes working with an alkalizer or working with pH therapy and really working at getting things back balanced, it's actually part of a protocol if you're working to try to dissolve kidney stones, because you need that urine to be back into its proper balanced state. So from all the knowledge and from the information that I've had in training over the years, there's not, as long as you follow when you're measuring the pH and making sure that you're only doing pH therapy when it's called for, then there's no concern for kidney stone formation. Other thing, just out of a side point that's kind of interesting, is depending on the constitution of your body, the aspergillus constitution, and often eating aspergillus niger as a remedy, that's the constitution that will have a tendency to form stones in the body. And so there is a bit of a constitution component to it. But when the body is balanced and pH therapy is applied so that you get back into an acid-base balance situation, then this does not create an opportunity for kidney stones to start forming. As with uric acid crystals also are not forming in gallstones and those things as well. Okay, so we've got 2 more quick questions here. And this actually does come up as a question, relatively commonly when people are asking questions about acid-base balance. And so Marcel asks, my question is, if someone's taking Pleo Alkala first thing in the morning and they have some diarrhea after taking it, are you able to explain why that may happen?
From my perspective, it's just they're flushing acids like really efficiently, but almost too efficiently. So we need to slow it down. When that happens, I have them take a half the amount. If they're still getting diarrhea, take half of that and work with it. So I always want to give my patients the opportunity to be in charge. So what is recommended is like a scoop, for example, of the Pleo Alkala, but that might not be the dose for them. So we're going to lower the dose until the diarrhea stops, and then you can and settles and normalizes a little bit, and then we can start applying, a little bigger dose as they're able to. So the body's just flushing efficiently, super efficiently. But
Mm-hmm.
again, remember that the acid environment is fast. So too much acid, everything's going to be really fast. The acid person has more diarrhea anyhow, or more so than an alkaline person. The distance between, if you look at the pH symptomatic pattern chart, when you have a chance, you're going to see that when the urine is acid and the saliva is alkaline, then we get more of that eruptive stomach. We get more gas and bloating. We get distension, like the beer belly tendency. We see that the stomach empties super quickly, and so they're really hungry really soon after flushing, like diarrhea, for example, or if they eat it, just it burns right through them. So if those are the characteristics of your patient, then I would start with that smaller dose. Maybe start with the quarters, start small, and then work your way up. That's also very valuable.
Great, thank you. And then we have one more question here regarding filtered water. So Alan is talking about reverse osmosis, which gives the water a pH of about 6. Is continuous use of this an issue for body pH?
Yes. So I've studied water a lot, and I had the wonderful privilege of um, a one-on-one with a scientist who made all the water systems for the astronauts. So it was quite an incredible conversation. And what was so beautiful is they totally understood pH. And he said that the pH of the water needs to be the same as the pH of the blood, or within a certain range. So water 7.2 to 7.4 is considered really comforting for the body. If the pH is too high, now it becomes an aggressive water, and it's going to argue for position. Remember that competitive inhibition. It's going to hoard minerals and push other things out. The same for when the pH is too acidic, your body's going to go on a scavenger hunt looking for minerals to buffer that pH. So that's in a nutshell how he explained it to me. So we always want the pH of the water to be a balanced pH, same as the blood, 7.365. So water 7.2 to 7.4.
That was a really beautiful answer, Maureen. And that is a perfect way to finish off this wonderful webinar on pH therapy. So thank you so much for joining the webinar. And thank you so much, Maureen, for imparting all of your knowledge and wisdom and your clinical experience to talk about pH therapy and how to apply it for patients, and then taking the time to answer all these questions as well.
Thank you so much, and all the best to each and every one of you. And I hope that you can embrace this with gusto.
Embrace with gusto and ask lots of questions when they come up, and we'll be more than happy to get those answers out to you and support you in your journey. So thanks, everybody.